Welcome to Unboxed. I'm your host, Connie, the founder of Astrid and Miyu. In these conversations, I speak to founders, investors, and creators who are all breaking boundaries in their space to discover the person behind the brand and what it took for them to build their empires. Hello, Unboxed listeners. Today's episode is powered by Payhawk, and we at Astrid and Miyu are excited to share how they've transformed our financial operations. Remember when our finance team was constantly buried under a mountain of receipts and expense reports? Those days are long gone, thanks to Payhawk. Now our finance team have evolved from receipt chasers to strategic powerhouses. Payhawk's innovative spend management platform has liberated our finance team from mundane, repetitive tasks. No more endless hours spent chasing down missing receipts or matching expenses within zero. With Payhawk handling day-to-day finance tasks, our team now has the time and mental space to dive deep into financial analysis, forecasting, and strategic planning. They're not just number crunchers anymore. They're key players in shaping Astrid and Miyu's future. But it's not just about our finance team. Payhawk has introduced us to what they call a healthy spend culture. Every employee knows exactly how, where, and what they can spend on. It's all pre-approved and crystal clear. This means less time worrying about expenses and more time focusing on what really matters, growing our business and serving our customers. Curious to see how Payhawk could elevate your finance team and streamline your operations? There's a link in our show notes where you can book a demo. Don't forget to mention you heard about them on the Unbox podcast. We're incredibly grateful to Payhawk for supporting both our show and Astrid and Miyu's growth journey. Today, we have a very special episode. It's a people-focused episode because a lot of you have been asking me people questions. However, I thought bringing on the experts would be the best way forward. So today, we have CPO of Payhawk, Sority, and we also have Alexia, who is our CPO at Astrid and Miyu. Hi, Lex. Hi, Aya.
Hi.
Welcome to the studio. Welcome to Unboxed.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you so much.
Today's episode will be so interesting because we've got a lot of listeners asking about people questions. So I've consolidated all of those questions and added a bit of mine. So let's start. But let's start by delving into your backgrounds and how you became CPOs in your own businesses because you two have very different experiences.
Well, shall I go first?
Yes, please.
So I come from a psychology background. So I did my undergraduate in psychology and then joined a media startup. So went straight into my first experience of a scale-up, which was fun, quite quickly progressed into a management position, worked abroad. And as I was in a more management position, I really enjoyed it. And so decided to do my master's in occupational psychology, organizational psychology. So I went and did my master's. And then during that time, got really interested in the ingredients that make really amazing places to work. And off the back of that, worked for a consultancy, worked with an international development agency, did a 5-year stint at Sweaty Betty while they were scaling, and worked in these in-house roles to really focus on the people experience and to create really inspiring places to work. And through that journey, I also had my first, second, and third child. And then after my third child, it was lockdown and decided to start freelancing with founders. So started working with founders specifically to put words to their mission, to their purpose, so they could really articulate it in an engaging way for their workforce, as well as to then define their values, to put words to their culture. And one of the companies I freelanced with was Astrid and Miyu, and
that's when we met.
And here I am, 4 years later.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And I love your background that you're coming from a business management and then taking over, moving into the HR. That's so important because it's part of the role. It's about how you tie your people strategy
I think
with
that's
the business.
exactly why Lex is so good at her role, because she understands business. She also has marketing background, so she's really able to build that employer branding as well.
Yeah,
It's funny because I actually felt quite insecure when I started off my career that I didn't have this traditional HR background. But now it's a strength actually.
So I've always worked in HR. Like in the last 17 years or so, I've grown in HR. And originally I'm from Egypt. So I was born and raised. Half of my career was mainly in Egypt. And I was very lucky. I would say like the transition point of my career was starting in a startup of literally employee number one. So I started with the CEO and just building everything with him. And that was a great learning. I've moved after 5 years or so, and when it was 3,000 people.
Oh, wow. What were you doing in that role?
Everything. So I was doing HR, marketing, sales, RFPs,
So
finance.
you're really a generalist, like Lex as well.
Yes, you have to be, right? It was only the two of us. So it was like finding the buildings. And it was from, no joke, like cleaning desks into up to hiring,
and I think when you're
the companies.
That first employee, you need to be really good with people, because generally that's not the founder's focus.
Exactly, right? So you bring that balance, right? So I've learned so much. I would say that was the learning about myself, right? Like the boundaries, the entrepreneurship style, the approach, where I belong, what I love. And then I've moved into corporate, Vodafone, which is like number one employer for like, I think 20 years or so since it's existed in Egypt. It's like the pyramids there, because I wanted to learn what good looks like how do you do, the best practice of people, talent, HR, all of that. Stayed there a couple of years, and then I've moved on an assignment to UK with Vodafone Group, and that's where I've realized this is my place, this is my home, I'm not going back. And I kept growing in my career doing business partnering, HR business partnering, also leading the ventures of Vodafone. So it was like a startup within a corporate.
Wow, so you stayed in a corporate for a very long time for someone who's grown up in a startup, because what we find in our business is a lot of younger people, they join us, they have so much fun, and then they always wonder what a big company, like what good looks like, what a structured company looks like. They go and they always regret.
Yeah.
Most of the time, I think like 95% of the time.
Absolutely, because you learn, it's the depth of the expertise, right? And you get that, which is a great learning. The moment I took over, it was a new venture of Vodafone, I realized, oh, wow, I missed that, right? I want to go back. And that's when I've moved back and I've shifted into SaaS. So that was my first experience into HR domain, and then into Mambu, core banking platform, and then now at Payhawk, my month 4 now. At Payhawk. But actually, before Payhawk, the toughest job, I would say, motherhood. So I went on maternity 6 months, and then I've shifted to...
Well, we can come back to motherhood later on. I guess for a startup and a scale-up, for me as well, and for a lot of founders, having an HR function is a bit of a luxury. At what point did you... Obviously, I know when Lex joined, but like for the purpose of our listeners, at what point did you to join your respective businesses, and what mission did you have when you joined first?
Yeah. I think you've mentioned it, right? That it's you bring that balance of the human, you bring the human centricity, especially if the founder or the CEO, they're more on the commercial side and the business side. So that's super important. And some have decided to bring that from, Series A, and some later on. So now I'm joining at Series B. Before that, I was at Series E. So it's really different timings. I would say it's becoming more core, right? On people, culture, building the right environment, that psychological safety, like all of that is becoming really key to how you foster innovation. People feel safe to experiment, to do mistake, to learn fast, and all of that. So at the start, I would say it's more on like the executional, operational side, right? And I would say definitely as you start you prove the product fit and all of that, you go into Series B, you definitely need to bring that strategic, HR, not purely strategic. Still, we roll, I'm sure it's the same we roll our sleeves, we do things, we go into sheets and docs and we build things, right? But it's important to have that from a mission and from a strategy and behind the what we build, and back to what you were saying, tying directly to the business. I think that's super important, that you just not sit in a tower and build, fancy stuff that could work in other company, but not where you are now.
Yeah, and I think it also depends on the strengths of the founder, because ideally, you brought me in quite early, I think, for a strategic people person to come in, because the business was just shy of 100 people, and it was lockdown.
It was lockdown, so all of our stores were closed.
So all of our stores were closed. So it was actually only 30 people active in the business at the time. But it allowed us the opportunity to set the foundations, to define our values, to really bring our purpose alive, so that when we were ready to scale, when the world opened back up,
Yeah.
we could scale really quickly and with really strong foundations.
Yeah. And I think in hindsight, I hired you at the right time, because if I hired you 1 year later or 2 years later, we would have been firefighting when you joined.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think that's been the case in most of my roles.
Yeah.
And so you spend the first couple of years actually trying to backtrack and change behaviors and set foundations that weren't in place, that could have been in place earlier.
Yeah.
But, if the founder is quite, they have a strong purpose and a mission, and they're able to set those values early on and build from that, then, maybe a strategic people person can wait. But I think bringing in a strong recruitment manager and someone strong on the talent management is so important if you're scaling.
Yeah. Especially if you're retail business, because retail business is people business.
Exactly.
And actually, it was so opportunistic, right? Because you joined as a consultant. I didn't have any plans to hire a strategic HR person, because I loved you so much. I thought I need to take her before anyone else takes her.
You saw the value, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And I guess I joined part-time as well to start with.
Yeah.
I was 3 days a week, which allowed us to build those foundations.
Exactly.
In
It
a
was a lot
costly
more
way.
flexible.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And what was the biggest gap you had to fill when you joined?
I'm not sure there was a gap, more of an opportunity. There was an opportunity. Well, it was lockdown. I think our first meeting was on the 20th of March, 2020, the day lockdown was announced. Yeah, it was. And it was the perfect opportunity for us to bring the business together, keep everyone connected during COVID, and define the values, get everyone sharing success stories, define those values, put in those foundations, so that when the world opened up, we were ready to go. So probably less of a gap and more of an opportunity.
What about you, Aya?
I'm reflecting, it's that connection, right, which is similar. While you globalize and you grow, it's important how do you build that and maintain it as you scale, right, in multiple offices, virtually. I would say the gap/opportunity is leadership. I think wherever I've worked, it's been always leadership, because we talk about building the culture and the environment, that's leadership who build that, right? Who foster this, who empower their teams, and having the right leadership in place is very important, right? And being clear about that philosophy, what's the leadership philosophy? What's your model? What's the behaviors you need to have in place? How do you have the right people thinking ahead, right, for the next 3 years plus? That is so important.
And how did you build that up?
So that starts with working with the founder, right, and the CEO, and saying, okay, what does leadership means for us, right, as we scale and for the business? That's the starting point, right? And you start to meet and look at the great examples you have, right, like the top talent, the top performers, what the behaviors, and it starts with that, right? And you start to shape, okay, what's the philosophy, what's the model, how it looks like. But what's important is then how do you embed it, how do you activate it? Because it could be very easily words on a paper, right? As lipstick on a pig, right? As they say. And it's important how you bring this to life. And it's I say it's not in a very scientific way. It's still art, but it needs to. You need to have the mechanism where there's some objectivity that you can help leaders to read it and say, oh, okay, this is where I'm great at, and this is where I want to get better. And then take that as a conversation with their leaders, and this is how I want to get better, and you go from, and you support them, and you build the enablers around it, and all of that, right? So I think building that model around it, it's important together with the co-founder and CEO.
Yeah, I agree. I think leadership recruitment is so important, and prioritizing first and foremost values alignment and alignment with the founder on the culture that they want to create.
So Lex did an amazing job when she was consulting for us in defining our values. I mean, we always had a strong culture, but it wasn't articulated per se. I had a list of laundry list of things that I wanted to see, but it wasn't crisp. No one could articulate that and recite it. Can you just tell our listeners and Aya how you've built that, what that process looked like? Because I thought it was so simple but so effective that a lot of people that are listening who are founders can probably implement that.
Yeah. So I guess the first question is, what are values? So essentially values are, and the values that you want to create in the business, they are the behaviors that will drive the company's success, the team's success, individual success. So yeah, it was pretty simple. We got, it was lockdown. We brought everyone together in the business. We did little workshops, and we asked everyone to share stories of success of their time at A&M, either as a team or as individuals. So it was beautiful. We had all these teams mixed. We have people from finance and the people team and the retail team and the marketing team sharing these success stories together. And then as a group, they distilled the key behaviors in these stories that made them a success. So the output to all these workshops was a whole list of incredible behaviors that had driven the company's success so far.
And I think Lex spoke to almost every single individual at that point,
We spoke,
right?
but they were easy to capture. They were at home.
Yes.
The approach as well, right? Yeah.
This was a fun and exciting thing.
Yes, and we could capture the retail teams too because they were at home. So it was all virtual. And with all these behaviors, we then themed them into themes. And I've done this exercise probably with a dozen different businesses. At A&M, these behaviors fell so effortlessly into these three themes that are now our values: grow together, celebrate each other, and break all boundaries.
Yeah, and we still live and breathe them. And
Amazing.
when Lex presented that to me, like they all resonated with me so strongly without her having to ask me before, right? We didn't have to edit anything.
Yeah, most of the time I sent it to the founder. We go back and forth, probably another dozen times. And it mildly represents what came out of the workshops. But yeah, I mean, it was a true testament to all I did was put words to what was already there. The culture was there, the values were there. Everyone knew what A&M was all about. We just needed to define it. We just needed to put
everyone
words
was
to it.
so aligned. And all the testimonials and the stories resonated with me personally as well.
Yeah, it was
It
a
was
beautiful
beautiful.
exercise.
And I'm sure it resonated with others, right? Because that's what's so important is that it's truthful, right? That people, when they read it, it's not just nice words or where we want to be. It's who we really are.
And it's from them. It wasn't
it's
from me.
them. It's their words, exactly. And it's you just ask the right questions, right? Like having that bottom-up approach is so important that we just don't sit in a room and we write it down, or right, and then they can't relate to it. So, and I'm sure it created a great hype, right? How you were explaining already, I feel, wow, that's great energy, that's positivity, that's thinking of success, opportunity. So, amazing approach.
Yeah, and can we talk about how we use those principles and values on a day-to-day basis in your businesses?
Yes, I think it's very important. You were saying that you live it, right? So I think it's how you embed it in everything that you do. So in attracting and hiring, how you do the interviews, how do you assess people, how they assess themselves, performance management. We always say it's important equally on the how and not only the what, but it's very important that articulation of the behaviors you said, right? What actually it means and what good look like, but what bad looks like as well, so that people can look at example and say, okay, that's, how I would be role modeling and behaving the values. So it's leadership, we talked, it's about how they reinforce and talk in every meeting and refer to that and when they give feedback. So I think if it's not enough to articulate, it's how we take this then and we live it in everything every framework, every practice on a day-to-day.
Yeah, absolutely. And what we did off the back of creating those three values is we created a behavior matrix that sat under it to really define one of our values is grow together. What does that actually mean in practice? So, for example, it means a manager asking their team for feedback. So we have very, very specific behaviors that sit under them that you can then recruit against, you can promote against, you can manage your team, manage your talent around that and celebrate it as well. So yeah, there's a very clear framework. Yeah, but absolutely, I agree with when you said values are as much what they're not as what they are.
Yeah.
So defining what behaviors you also don't want.
Yeah.
To bring clarity to what you do want.
Yeah, because I think it just needs one toxic behavior, one person, right, that drags the whole team down. And it's also very important that the leaders, they feel equipped to identify that. And this is where they need, to take some tough decisions, to have those conversations with them, to push, right, and act fast. So it's so important to also articulate, what it's not like and what it shouldn't be.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about toxic behaviors and toxic person, because even if you have 100 people in the office that are amazing on value, one person can ruin that whole culture or the culture of the department. You probably know, right? How do we identify them and how do we act quickly on them? I mean, it's still an ongoing question for us as well.
Yeah, it is. And we've implemented so many feedback loops. We have anonymous feedback loops, we have open doors, we have surveys, we have exit interviews, we have entrance interviews, entrance surveys. We have so many different feedback channels. And as a people team, we're out speaking to people as much as we possibly can. So we're constantly checking in on people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because as senior leaders, it's so hard to see because a lot of the times people who are toxic could be really good at managing up.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, and it needs to start from there as well, right? So it needs to start from and it needs to be role modeled. So one of the CEOs I've worked with previously at Mambo, actually Fernando, he was great at that. He would not tolerate it, right? And you set an example, you set a role model. And I remember very well, it was someone who was great in achieving results, right? Like top, but was toxic to the team. And he had to take that tough decision and say why. So the communication of it is very important with respect to the person, right? In a factual way. And funny enough, looking at then the team, how they were thriving after that decision was amazing, right? Because this always is the worry that holds back some of the leaders of saying, yeah, but they're performing great, right? Maybe we can coach. And that's what slows them down. But it actually, when you see the result of it and everyone sees it, it encouraged to create that, and everyone appreciated it, right?
Yeah,
So how do we enable them? And you talked about the articulation and translating things to very specific behaviors, right? For the leaders, then those are their tools, right?
And oftentimes what we find is when you're a junior person on the receiving end of that toxic manager or a leader, it takes a very long time for them to speak up. How do we enable people to speak up?
It's offering all the feedback channels that you possibly can, I think. And that psychological safety. So psychological safety is a huge part of the management growth that we have put together here. And we talk about it all the time so that teams have the psychological safety to raise things, at least with their manager, if not to anyone else. And you know, if they can't to their manager, then they feel safe to come to the people team. So that's a huge part, developing that, especially as we scale and the business gets bigger. Whilst also having every single possible channel for them to speak to us. I don't know if you have any other...
Yeah, no, I looked at you because you study psychology. It's exactly that, right? It's creating that safety. And you know, there are some practical ways of... I haven't experienced it personally, but I've heard of best practice where you create like fuck-up dates, right? And you bring teams to talk about big fuck-ups or big mistakes, or right? And celebrate that so they feel, oh, actually, it's great to fail and learn from that, and how do we do it differently. So that also creates that safety that they feel they can speak up if they spot something and prevent.
That's a good idea. Fuck up days.
And then when they do raise it, they're listened to.
Let's talk about recruitment, because recruitment is the first touch point of someone's journey. And also it is the foundation of building a great culture and building a great business. What is your personal philosophy and the business's philosophy?
Our philosophy is 100% values first and foremost, and then technical and skill-based and experience. Because like you said, I think some of the most toxic people in a business are the ones that are really high on the technical and the performance and really low on the values. They're great at their technicals of their job, but they don't have the growth mindset. They can't adapt to change. They're not positive with their team. But it's kind of masked because they are so good at the technicals
but you know
of their
what?
role.
They're technical stalls because they're not adaptable generally. They're really strong when they're hired, but they're not able to grow.
Yeah. And I think that's the other part. So culture fit is number one, absolutely. And it's that learning agility. So looking for potentiality in people, right? Because things change so much every day in the market and everything, right? In tech, in all industries. So it's how do you bring the people who have this learning agility? And it's like a very practical example. Like I always do competency-based interviews. So I always like to ask people about situations they've gone in the past, circumstances, what they've done, impact, all of that. And I always ask at the end, if you go back, how would you have done it differently? What have you learned? How did it impact you personally? How did it impact your growth? How did it impact the team? And it shows me like that self-reflection, that self-assessment, that's growth, learning, And if someone stops, it's like, oh, no, nothing I like. Yeah, it was perfect, right? Then it shows there's lack of that and lack of also being humble and, wanting to learn more. So I think the learning agility, as you say, is super important. But number one, absolutely culture fit. Then the skills.
I love that. All the mistakes questions we ask all of that. And questions to see their level of self-awareness as well. Like, what misconceptions do people have about you?
I love that question. What's your favorite interview question?
probably that one.
What's the biggest misconception about you?
What misconceptions do people have about you?
Yeah, I'm gonna use that.
Yeah.
Love that. What would you do differently if you go back? That would be my
Mine is, what's your biggest setback? I guess they're all similar, isn't it?
It's that self-awareness.
Yeah, exactly. What's the biggest mistake a manager, leader, or I guess like a founder make?
Probably hiring technical first and foremost, because you need the job done. I think it's quite easy to just get the best person for the job in, because I don't know how to do this and I just need someone to do it.
It's super urgent in a scale.
And it's urgent and you're rushing and you're compromising. And not, I think also one of the biggest mistakes, which we sometimes have to relearn because we keep making it, is just not being patient. If the right person hasn't applied or the right person isn't in the recruitment process, then being patient and waiting for the right person to come.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I completely agree with that. Yeah, and we could easily fall in that mistake sometimes, right? With the high velocity and moving fast, it's like, we need them fast, right?
Yeah.
But it's the first most important starting point. And I think the other one I would add is empathy. It's how, which is something very difficult to develop, right, or to learn. So, but it could be easy trained on looking from different people perspectives, understanding your team's needs, right? And again, I'd go back to leaders. Like, it's so important that they empathize, because it's not about what makes them successful. It's what does make your team successful, right? And tailor that to their needs and approach and personalities, because that's what makes the business successful, right? So I'd say empathy is, the difficult.
I would correct that for emotional intelligence. I guess it's all like how you define
Connie's
it.
quite low on empathy.
Because we do a strength finder exercise. Do you know about the Clifton Strength Finder?
Yeah.
Do you know what your strengths are? Have you taken it?
Remind me of it. Remind me of the.
So it's got 34 different strengths, and they're quite narrowly defined. So empathy, like here, is defined by how much you can feel other people's pain. So I'm very low on empathy, but I always like pride myself in being a very empathetic person. So now I use the term emotional intelligence.
Yes.
So it's looking from that perspective, right? So it's hard to it's you have it or right. So it's understanding the needs, why they're doing this, why they're not doing that, right?
Yeah.
Their approach, how they learn, how they like to take feedback, how they grow, how can they be how can they be at their best, I think.
And thinking it from their perspective, not like your selfish point of view.
Exactly. Yes.
So let's talk about one of the most prominent figures in HR, Patty McCord, who was the CPO, Chief Talent Officer at Netflix. And she kind of created this whole culture Bible, and I was obsessed with it at some point. But a lot of her philosophy I don't agree with. I feel like it's a bit harsh. Like, can we talk about this?
Yeah.
What do you think? What are your thoughts?
I'm a huge fan. I think what Netflix did really, really well was they were very intentional with defining who they were and what their values were, and just as importantly, who they were not. So they made it very, very crystal clear.
Yeah, it was very clear.
What people would expect if they were working at Netflix. And so people could self-select. You know, it's not for everyone. They never claimed they were for everyone. The reason this culture deck came out was so that people could self-select before the recruitment process. So they know if they're if that kind of culture is going to work for them. What I also absolutely loved that she did so well was this freedom, responsibility and freedom, or freedom and responsibility, and creating this adult-to-adult culture. Because I feel like HR over the entire 20th century just became so policy and procedure driven that people lost the ability to think for themselves. Like managers lost the ability to just make decisions for themselves and use their own judgment and their own common sense. And they just had to refer to this long 200-page handbook and try and figure out what policy they need to be making sure they follow in any process. And they scrapped all of that. They scrapped all this and created this freedom and responsibility. You know, if you want to, we're going to treat you as adults and you need to behave like them. So they scrapped the expense policy, scrapped the vacation policy.
And HR became a lot more visionary and strategic from that point on, right?
Yes, exactly. So huge inspiration to everyone, I think, in HR with what she's created as a HR lead.
I love what you're saying on the policing thing, and I hate when people sometimes say, "Oh, we have HR in the room." I was like, we're not the police here, right? Exactly. It's a different positioning. So I admire it, and I adopt a lot of the approach, and like where I think it depends on the business and where they are and what's important and how fast they need to move and all of this, right? Because they take tough decisions very fast, right? And I admire, and yet they needed that, right? Because before trusting people and having that adult to adult, you want to make sure that you have the right talent in place as well, right? So it comes before scrapping all the policies, right? That you need to have people who have the right logic and judgment skills as well. So that's important. I think the other thing to also for me that it's like important is we talked about learning agility and hiring for potential and that investment. That's one of my key passions personally. So it's important to grow, invest, stretch. And I've seen examples of people when you change their jobs, when you change their manager, they do much more and amazingly jobs, right? And I really believe in that test and stretch as long as you see the potentiality and not take as fast as decisions. But again, it was right for that time for them, at that moment for the business, I think. Also, practically speaking, it's like there are lots of considerations in European countries, right? You can do that, right? Maybe in the US or so. Yeah. And I love how they approach that with respect and very generous, right? To people to help them transition. But again, it's what phase are you at a scale up and startup, right? Can you, from an affordability perspective? So I think there's lots of things to think philosophically, but also practically speaking on that.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So you're at top of your game, both of you. And I know it's very lonely at the top. How do you get your inspiration and learnings?
I listen to a lot of podcasts. So I love listening to Patty McCord and Lena Nair. And then I follow a lot of like social psychologists like Adam Grant and Simon Sinek and Amy Edmonton and everything she's doing on psychological safety. And then like having a great leadership team as well and having a team where you feel so aligned and so supported is incredibly helpful.
Yeah, absolute same. And reading, and now I'm reading Frances Fry books, which is very inspiring. Actually, I've learned about her from from the co-founder, the CEO, Risto, my boss, which is inspiring me and inspiring how we're approaching the leadership philosophy and all of that. But as you say, it gets lonely, right? So it's that, right? And having this community and speaking with CPOs and being part of this, and that's super, having mentorship, having coaches, because part of the role, we partner with the CEO on supporting, enabling them with the exec leadership, right? And making sure they have the right leadership bench. So while we are part of that, right? And we build trusting relationship there, it's also tricky, right? And it could get lonely. So mentorship, coaching, leading, all of that.
Yes, because it's quite a heavy role as well. It can be very heavy, can't it?
Yeah.
You're dealing with people, you're dealing with a lot of emotions. Yes. A lot of it's confidential. You can't talk about it.
All the uglies. I mean, a lot of goods, but all the uglies.
Yeah, some days can be quite heavy.
Yeah, absolutely.
We were talking about that anonymous feedback loop, because sometimes I get like a lot of positive ones through that, but Lex gets all the negative ones.
I get all the complaints, basically. Connie gets all the positive feedback about the culture and values.
But that's great, right? That people are speaking up both. Like that's because it's always easier to complain, right? And not talk about the great stuff. So that's a nice balance.
Exactly. And when you're moving fast, the first thing that goes is you forget to give the positive feedback. You forget to say the thank yous. And the complaints get louder and louder because it's the only thing coming through. Yeah.
Do you have a favorite book on leadership?
Conscious Business. I
loved.
I think I've read that twice now.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
It's a great, great book.
It's amazing.
I think I'm hooked with the book I'm reading now, Frances Fry. I think it was Unleash Potential. Can't remember the name of the book. I can leave it later. But it talks a lot about empathy. / emotional intelligence, building trust, and all of that.
Yeah. I love Give and Take. Adam Grant.
I love Adam Grant.
Yes. Yeah, Adam Grant.
Yeah.
We're fangirls.
You're definite fangirl.
So both of you are mothers. You're just returning from your mat leave and joined a new business. Very brave. and Lex has
Thank
3
you.
kids who are a bit older. I guess like a lot of the relevant questions are, a lot of our listeners are also like moms of young children that are trying to start their businesses during their maternity leave. How did you, I guess, structure your maternity leave, or like what was your approach to it, and how did you show up back at work? Because you only took 6 months off, for instance, like
True.
we were just talking about. Can you just like talk about your journey?
Of course, and look, I'm still figuring it out, right? So I'm still learning it. So we'd love to hear from you as well, like so. I'd say it's very important to have the structure and the planning around it. So I could see ahead, okay, I'm going back in 6 months, and I'm going very practical here of thinking sleep training, right? Because I need to sleep over the night to be fit, right? And he also needs to sleep well. So that was the first thing, right? When do I start weaning? Do I do it early? Because then when they go to nursery, when do they go to nursery? So doing that planning ahead of having, like this is when I'm returning to work. So that was very important. I think creating the system at home, like having a great supportive husband, I think that's number one. And husband, partner, family, supporting system around a person, right? Like I always think, I don't know how single moms do that, right? Because it's so tough. So I think building that system with them of, okay, when are the pickups? When are the drops? So it's so simple, but it's literally in our calendars, right? So that you have the peace of mind and you have your day plan and you can focus at one thing. So I think this is what has helped me so far. But emotionally, it's still like I'm still learning to balance, right? And I figured like I need to be fine with that, right? And sometimes I get like the guilt feelings, right? Which is like, it's the worst feeling ever, right? And I don't know if those will ever go away no matter what we do. I'd love to hear, maybe they go.
The mum guilt, sorry, it doesn't go.
It doesn't, right? Because I know every phase has its challenge as well. So that's something I'm still learning. But it's very difficult for our job. And I think especially as women, because we want to always be very strong, right? And always have that positioning at work. And we partner with the CEOs and co-founders, right? So how do you put this aside, right? And go with that strong face, but while you're still authentic and human and bring that part and bring the great part of it in our job, right? Of how can we make the environment more flexible for women and moms and parents and caretakers and all of that. So there's a lot of great opportunity of it. But personally, I would say I'm still learning the balance.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. So am I. So mine are all at school now. So I feel like we have moved into the next chapter. With them all being at school, they're all a bit older. They can do everything themselves, basically, like eat and have showers and do things like this. So they're a bit more independent. But that support network is absolutely key. Having that, so I have an incredibly supportive partner. So if you have a supportive partner or grandparents or aunts, uncles, community, handful of parents that you can call if you can't get to school, pick up on time.
You need a village.
It takes a village. So you need to find your village, absolutely. But I think also what was key for me was accepting that there's going to be good days, there's going to be great days, and then there's going to be days that aren't that great. And you go to bed and you're like, I didn't quite nail that today. I don't feel like I was good at any part of any of my roles. And then just seeing the next day as a new day.
And so it's so hard to accept that though, because I remember like when obviously my experience is slightly different because I'm a founder. I had to come back pretty quickly. But I just like, one day I just broke down because like, I'm doing all of these things. I'm always so busy. I'm like, going to work after like 3 months or like actually like 6 weeks after my second. And I also have a nanny, but the house is a mess. Like I can't even cook. I can't do anything. And I just like had a breakdown at one point and I just didn't know how to get out of it. Obviously like hormones were in play at that time as well. So you eventually get out of it. But what are some practical ways for a new mom who's just had a baby to get out of this funk?
I can relate. Like it's not one time. I think almost every day.
Because we have a lot of new moms in our business as well, and I think it is hard.
Yeah, but just knowing that it's not going to last forever. It will get easier, and if you have to take one day at a time, just take one day at a time to start with, because it can feel quite overwhelming to think a year in ahead when you're on cumulatively 3 hours sleep a night over the course of the last few months. And it's hard to rationalize and to think straight. And sometimes you do just need to take one day at a time.
Talking also to people and
talking to people.
I think that's important.
Network and asking for help. Asking for help and calling someone if you just need an hour to yourself.
Don't be hard on yourself, right? Like that was my learning, right? Because we want to be superwoman, right? We want to be great at the job, great at home, like
absolutely.
And it needs a team. So
and I completely agree about the partner bit, because a lot of like young women who are career focused, that's not the area of focus a lot of the times, finding the right partner. So they end up marrying the person they were with forever, or like it's not very strategic, but I think you need to approach it a bit strategically, finding the right partner.
100%. It's a life decision.
It is the most important decision of your life.
Really is. The values alignment. When I talk about the values alignment,
did you that's
the most important recruit.
Got your bid.
What's the misconception about you? Biggest misconception?
What would you do differently?
Love that. But I think you do need to kind of treat it like a job interview.
Yes, 100%.
Without it being like non-romantic.
Because those little amber flags that you have at the start, they will turn into big red flags when you have kids.
And explaining and talking through it, right? Because not all my partner is low on the empathy, emotional intelligence side, right? He's an engineer, he's an aerospace engineer, right? Like quantum physics is his hobby. So I need to communicate and articulate, this is how I feel, and this is what I need, and this, and that's helped so much, right? And I couldn't have been luckier, right? Than sharing, my family with him. And it's just the two of us, because our families are abroad. So it's really important to have that strong support.
Right now, there's a lot of talk around recession, and tech isn't what it used to be. It's not the tech boom anymore. There's a lot of layoffs and everything, and retail like equally, right? Consumer sentiment has been down. When do you decide from a strategic HR, like people point of view, to hire more or kind of hold back on your hiring?
I think it goes back to what you were saying about the business strategy, right? How our strategy needs to be tied super closely, and the focus is on growth, the top line, right? How do you generate that? Then you do bring, talent in. So I think that's important. And when you're focusing, you need to step back and look at your bottom line, and you need to realize some efficiencies, which unfortunately was the case, right? The last couple, 2 or 3 years, then it's those tough decisions. But it's very like now, before, I think it's a learned lesson. Before we decide on mass hiring, I always ask like, why and what's the opportunity and what's the business context, and really understand and remind them we don't want to do the mistake of hiring fast and then laying off people, right? So it's and that's the trusting relationship between the CPO and the founder or CEO, right? To go and really look at the business context and not rush into those decisions.
100%. And I think with decisions like that would never be, at A&M, that would never be my decision. As a leadership team, we're so collaborative. That would be a collaborative decision as a leadership team, whether we decide to scale back on the hiring or ramp it up. And there's so many different data points that would feed into that decision as well.
What is one advice you'd give a budding manager or a leader?
What's saying it?
What is one advice you'd give a budding manager or a leader?
Be curious. Lead with curiosity first and foremost. Always understand the context first and foremost. If someone makes a mistake, look at the context to that and stay curious.
Positive intent.
Yes.
Yeah, love that. Lead with context. Yeah, I echo that. And empathy. Yeah, I'd always say empathy. Yeah. Empathize with the team, understand their needs.
We know what your top strength is.
Yes.
It's our strength finder, insights, whatever, it always comes on the
That's one of Lex's top strength as well.
Yeah, it is actually. Yeah.
That's what makes us.
We should share profiles after.
Oh, that was so fun and inspiring. Thank you so much, both of you.
Thank you so much. That was great.
So much.
Yeah, that was so fun. Thank you so much for listening. Don't forget to follow the podcast wherever you're listening or watching. You can follow me at Connie Nam, Astrid and Miyu at Astrid and Miyu, and the Unboxed Instagram page at unboxed_founder confidential. See you next week.